The 2020 presidential race is likely coming down to the usual suspects when it comes to battleground states. Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all in the Rust Belt, are the places where a few thousand votes could decide the fate for the rest of the country. Acknowledging this, it's no surprise why supporters of the Biden campaign are rushing to defend comments made by the former VP during the last debate, where he suggested that he would transition away from fossil fuels altogether. So here to help us break down the media's coverage of this narrative is Turning Point USA contributor Isabel Brown. So Isabel, I want to play the Biden campaign's latest defense when it comes to fossil fuels and then get your response on the other side. Let's take a look.
Long term, Joe Biden doesn't sound like a supporter of those industries. So why shouldn't those folks think, you know what, Donald Trump's going to be more supportive, not Joe Biden? You comfortable with that?
Let's be really clear about something, Chuck. There is only one person in this country who Joe Biden thinks should lose his job, and it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is trying to distort Joe Biden's position on this because he's desperate to be running against anybody but Joe Biden. That's been true from the start of this primary. Look, he, as Joe Biden said on the debate stage, he is not going to end the fossil fuel industry. He's going to end subsidies for the oil industry. He believes that your taxpayer dollars should go to education. Donald Trump believes they should go to Exxon. That is a contrast in a conversation that we're willing to have any day.
So, Isabel, isn't this the problem that a lot of these Democrats knew they were going to have for a long time when they raced to the left during the primary and then try to counter back to the middle? Like, they're going to have a hard time selling that to the people of Pennsylvania?
Absolutely, and this is not the first issue we've seen the Biden campaign flip-flop on when it comes to trying to gain last-minute support from voters. I think the unfortunate reality of this campaign cycle is that American voters really haven't heard solid answers on any policy issue from either former Vice President Joe Biden or Senator Kamala Harris. And when an answer is given, it's usually in stark contrast to their own experience in Washington politics. So I'm not sure voters will really have an opportunity to trust what the Biden-Harris ticket is telling us as we go into November 3rd.
No, I think you're exactly right, because even when we go through the issues, I mean, NAFTA was another one, for example, where as of recently, Joe Biden said, you know, that wasn't the best thing that I could have done. They still won't give a clear and concise answer when it comes to court packing. I think that this is just something that the American people are starting to see, that they don't want to voice their progressive end goal necessarily, but they do need to make this kind of pitch to the American people in hopes of winning over moderates and maybe taking people away from President Trump. And I know that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was asked about those comments, and unlike Republicans and moderate Democrats, she criticized the Biden ticket, but coming from the left. So let's take a look at what she had to say.
During the primary, he sounded supportive of a ban. On Saturday, he told voters in Pennsylvania, quote, "I'm not banning fracking, period." It sounds like now he's on the other side of this issue from you. Does it bother you?
You know, it does not bother me. I believe, and I have a very strong position on fracking. You know, the science is very clear. That is my view. Vice President Biden has made very clear that he does not agree with a fracking ban, and I consider that, you know, it will be a privilege to lobby him should we win the White House, but we need to focus on winning the White House first.
So we also know that Senator Bernie Sanders is putting together his goals for the first 100 days of a potential Biden administration. Does this all show where the future of the Democratic Party is actually headed?
Certainly, and socialism really is the new trend when it comes to the Democrat Party. I think it's interesting that we're seeing the Biden-Harris campaign start to try to distance themselves from the Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman AOCs of the world, when in reality, their campaign platform website is really riddled with socialist ideas, even propagated by people like AOC herself. The Green New Deal is verbatim mentioned as a leading policy that the Biden-Harris campaign would put into effect should they win the White House race this November. Yet they're starting to understand that socialism doesn't really resonate with American voters as well as they thought they did, especially in swing states like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like Arizona. And that's why I think that distancing is starting to happen. But at the end of the day, we're just seeing the continued really empty talking points and empty campaign promises that we've continued to see from Joe Biden for the last almost 50 years.
And Kamala Harris is a little bit better of an example for me than this, because Joe Biden, for example, he has been more of a moderate for the past 40 years, however long he's been in politics for. But a lot of people are saying that he's now the vehicle for these progressive type of values. And I think Kamala Harris is someone who represents that a little bit more so since she's newer to politics. And we saw the highly anticipated 60 Minutes episode aired last night where Senator Kamala Harris was asked if she represented the socialistic wing of the Democratic Party, to which she laughed off the allegation. Here's what she had to say about that claim.
I will always share with him my lived experience as it relates to any issue that we confront. And I promised Joe that I will give him that perspective and always be honest with him.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
No. No, it is the perspective of a woman who grew up a black child in America, who was also a prosecutor, who also has a mother who arrived here at the age of 19 from India, who also, you know, likes hip hop. Like, what do you want to know?
So she likes hip hop. She can't be a socialist, right? But she also rejected there that the claim that she was the most liberal senator back in 2019, earning a fact check by CBS's Norah O'Donnell to her credit. So do you think that people believe Senator Harris when it comes to her defense that she's not progressive, she's not far left, she's not a socialist?
Well, I certainly hope not, because contrary to Senator Kamala Harris's laugh there in her answer, it's not really a funny question. Socialism has decimated the human experience all around the world and would be completely devastating to be implemented here in the United States of America. Obviously, it's the new flashy talking point within the Democrat Party, but she herself has agreed more often than not with outspoken socialists, voting most of the time to the left of even Senator Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a socialist. I think the American people need to be aware of her voting record more than her campaign promises. And she herself needs to take a long look in the mirror and realize whether or not she is a socialist and be honest with the American people.
So, Isabel, do you think that this is the strategy of the Democratic Party right now? I mean, to say that, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez barely got any airtime during the DNC, but I think that everybody in the country knows that that is the direction of the Democratic Party, but maybe the American electorate just isn't ready for that. I mean, there's a reason why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not front and center of these campaign events. There's a reason why Senator Bernie Sanders is a behind-the-scenes type of figure when he's writing legislation. Do you think it's clear that the Democratic Party knows the direction that it's headed in, but it doesn't want to necessarily show its colors yet?
You hit the nail right on the head. The American people just aren't ready to embrace socialism with open arms, even if the vast majority of millennials might be. But it's interesting because we're starting to see this culture war that has been going on in our country tip away from the idea of socialism and complete government control. When you look around at the excitement for candidates in our country, you see maybe 10 to 12 people show up to Joe Biden rallies, but you're seeing tens of thousands of people waiting in line to show up where it counts to support President Trump in person at rallies all across the country, sometimes multiple times a day. That excitement factor just isn't there on the left side of the aisle, and I have to wonder whether or not this idea of talking socialism into reality has played into that as we've entered 2020.
Very interesting point, because typically when we talk about the enthusiasm on the left, we do talk about the progressives and the more, as we were saying, socialistic type of candidates, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. But right now, we're not seeing that same enthusiasm when it comes to Joe Biden. So there is a question there. Does the Democratic Party not necessarily agree with that progressive wing, and that's why they're not showing up? Or is it just the fact that maybe Joe Biden isn't the most likable character? I guess we'll find out more so on November 3rd. But President Trump, he also had his 60 Minutes interview air on Sunday night, where he criticized the media for what he called its unfair coverage. I'm going to play what he had to say.
I wish you would interview Joe Biden like you interview me. It would be so good. You know what?
You like this, I thought. I thought you liked
I don't mind it. But when I watch him walk out of a store, and he's walking with an ice cream, and the question the media asks him, what kind of ice cream, what flavor ice cream do you have? And he's in the midst of a scandal.
He's not.
And he's taking... Of course he is,
no.
Leslie.
Come on.
Of course he is. It's the biggest, second biggest scandal. So, the biggest scandal was when they spied on my campaign. They spied on my campaign,
there's
Leslie.
no real evidence of that.
Of course there is. It's all over the place. Leslie,
Sir,
they spied on my campaign and they got caught.
Can I say something? You know, this is 60 Minutes, and we can't put on things we can't verify.
You won't put it on because it's bad for Biden.
So between the lack of coverage on the Hunter Biden allegations, the very different framings of questions in that interview, and the lack of questions taken by the Democratic ticket at all, is the criticism of media bias something that's here to stay even after a Trump presidency?
Absolutely. The American people across the board have started to wake up to this idea that the media is not doing what it's supposed to do in just telling us the news and the headlines and the most important events that have happened every day. Instead, ratings are really driving most of their viewership. And unfortunately, that often means that one side of the aisle is presented more favorably than the other. We're seeing so much of that in this 2020 campaign cycle. And never before in American history have we seen a presidential candidate call a lid several times before noon, just days before the presidential election, or even take a 4-day break from the press altogether. I suppose it must be nice if you can have a favorable view in the media and they can continue to support your policies in a very uplifting way, even when you're not talking to them directly. But that media bias is so obvious and affects very, very many more people, more than President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. It's affecting everyday American citizens. So I certainly think people are going to continue speaking up about that in the future.
And it's an ironic conversation, too, because these news outlets, for example, want to make it all against President Trump. I mean, he's this terrible man that can't be accepted in American society. But at the same time, he's the man who's saving their ratings. I mean, people like MSNBC, CNN, they would have gone under completely, most likely, if it wasn't for 2016. And maybe if we're returning back to a Biden presidency, too. I mean, I remember during the primary, a lot of progressives were not happy with the way that MSNBC was treating Bernie Sanders. And there was, for example, a long time where they were saying, you know what, we're done with the mainstream media, too. Do you think that these legacy media outlets are coming to their end?
We'll see, and I think it's definitely going to play out here with this election and moving forward with what our American culture looks like as it relates to the mainstream media. But one thing is for certain, both politics and media will never be the same again.
No, there's no doubt about that. And especially nowadays, too, when we look at how many people are getting their news. I mean, sure, they still go to the news outlets every now and then, but nowadays it's so much about independent journalists or going on social media and following someone that you trust on certain issues and maybe don't trust on other issues. And I think that's fine. I think as long as there's transparency about where this information is coming from. And I think that really comes back to the problem that a lot of people have in our modern societies. At the end of the day, they just stopped losing trust in these legacy media outlets, whether it's NBC, ABC, whatever. And even looking back on previous stories, maybe we weren't getting the truth then either necessarily. But Isabel Brown, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight, breaking down these media headlines. Thank you.
Thanks so much.